Hey friends, and welcome back. My name is Matt, aka Martion. I hope you're doing well. And today I wanted to take a look at some kind of advanced audio routing techniques inside of Ableton Live. Now, I will be perfectly honest that when thinking of the idea for today's video, I tried to come up with a bunch of different examples, but I couldn't really come up with anything that showcased these techniques in a way that was kind of practical and useful. But I thought these techniques were really cool, so I wanted to share them with you anyways. So apologies for lack of practical examples in the upcoming video, but hopefully you enjoy, hopefully you learn some things, and hopefully you find out some really interesting techniques, and maybe you can apply these techniques in a really creative way yourself. And if you do, obviously feel free to drop a comment down below and let me know how you've used these techniques in your own practice. Now, before we get into the video, of course, if you like it, feel free to drop a like and a comment down below. Subscribe if you're new, and if you really enjoy my content, head over to my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can buy me a coffee, support the channel, become a member, and get a bunch of cool stuff. But without any further ado, let's dive into Ableton Live, and I will show you how to do these advanced audio routing techniques that I think are really cool. Okay, so here we are in Ableton Live, and first I thought it'd be a good idea to just go through some of the basic routing options that we have available to us inside of Ableton Live before we get to some of the more advanced stuff. Now, I'll probably do a more in-depth video about basic routing in Ableton Live, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to assume you know most of the basic stuff. I'm just going to go through it anyway, really fast and quick. So first up, taking a look at our basic audio routing options inside of Ableton Live. If I have an audio track, I can open up my I/O section by going down to the bottom right-hand corner, clicking on this I/O button right here, which loads up this kind of middle section in our session view. And on an audio track, I can choose where that audio track is monitoring audio from. So for instance, I could have it coming from an external source like my microphone, which we can see there now that I've set up my microphone, it's coming in there. And I can also choose where the audio is going to out of this audio track. So for instance, I could set up another audio track here and send the audio from this audio track to that second audio track. Now, just for the sake of not kind of having any feedback or anything like this, I'm going to mute this second audio track here. And then we have our kind of monitoring sections here. When it's set to auto, if I have this little record enable button turned on, now this track is going to be monitoring this audio coming into it. And we can see that obviously this audio is not going out to this second track because the record arm button is not on this second track. So if I arm this second track, we can see the audio is coming out of this first track, going into this second track. Now, if I don't want to have the record enable button on, I can simply just set both of these to monitor the input, and that will consistently monitor the input, even if I don't have the record enable button turned on. Now, currently, Audio 1 is routing its output to Audio 2, which means that if I mute Audio 1, Audio 2 is not going to be receiving anything. We can see there's nothing going on there. But if I wanted our Audio 2 track here to receive the audio from Audio 1, but I wanted to have Audio 1 muted, what I could do is instead of routing the output from Audio 1 to Audio 2 here, I could set the Audio 1 output to either master or sends only or somewhere else. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to set it to sends only for this purpose. And now I'm going to select the audio from option on audio track number 2, and instead of doing an external input, I'm going to select it from Audio 1. And now, instead of getting this kind of drop-down menu where we choose where the audio comes from say, our audio interface, we get a few different options here. We get pre-effects, post-effects, and post-mixer. Currently being set to post-mixer, this track is not receiving anything because this Audio 1 track is not coming out of the mixer. It's muted, right? But if we set this to either post-effects or pre-effects, we can see that when I set it to post-effects, we now start receiving signal on audio track number 2. And on pre-effects, we get the same thing. Now, if I had an effect on this channel, we would hear just the dry signal coming through on audio channel 2. And if I set this to post-effects, then we would hear the wet signal or the affected signal coming out on audio track 2. So that's our basic kind of audio routing options inside of Ableton Live, but I wanted to show you some other kind of cool techniques that you can do with this routing. I'm going to just delete this second audio track here, and I have this ARP sound that is playing on this second track, which is a MIDI track, which sounds like this. So we're going to be working with this sound here to show you these techniques. Okay, so what I'm going to do is add a delay to this track right here. So now we get a sound that sounds like this. I'm not worried about the settings of the delay at the moment because I want to show this to you in this regard. So now I can obviously set up audio track 1 here to receive the audio either pre or post effects or even post mixer. So I can go audio from the ARP track here. And if I mute this ARP track, which we can see is now muted, I can get audio 1 here to receive this audio from either pre-effects. So if I unmute audio track 1, we can now, as I set this audio output to the master so we can actually hear it. If I play this, we'll hear just the dry ARP signal. And if I set this to post effects, we're going to hear the delayed version of the ARP signal. So we've now effectively routed the audio from the ARP track here into this track, except we haven't redirected the audio. We've just told audio track 1 to kind of tap into the audio at this particular point in time after this delay. But now is where it gets really interesting. So I want to add a reverb to this ARP as well here. And I'm going to mute the audio 1 track here. And we're just going to unmute our ARP track so we can just hear the reverbed version, or so we can hear our actual version of this. And so now, with our audio 1 track, we can either have it receive the audio before all of those effects. If I unmute this and set this to pre-effects, we can hear this happening now. Just the dry signal, or we can have it getting it post effects, or of course post mixer, but we're going to worry about that later. We don't really want to worry about post mixer here. And so we can hear the reverb version of the signal. But what's really cool is that I can actually tap into the signal in between this delay and this reverb here. So what I'm going to do is grab the reverb and I'm going to right click it, and I'm going to now group this reverb to an audio effect rack. And so that we can easily see what's going on here, I'm going to unfold this audio effect rack and I'm going to recall it reverb. And I'm going to also rename this chain for a reason that you'll see in a second. So I'm going to click on this chain, rename it to wet, just to say that it's the wet reverb. And now have a look at what shows up in our second drop-down menu on audio 1 here. We now have an option to receive the audio on audio track 1 from either pre all of the effects on our ARP track, post all of the effects on the ARP track, post the mixer, of course, or pre just that reverb rack or post that reverb rack, or of course, post that mixer as well. So if we take a listen to this, I can now go pre-effects. We're going to get the dry signal. I could go post effects. We're going to get the entirely reverb signal. Or I could go pre-effects from the reverb, and now we're going to get just the delayed version of the signal. Now that in itself, I think is a really fantastic technique, because now we can start to do some really interesting things. I can start applying processing on audio track 1 here, and that will apply the processing to the version of the signal after the delay. So as an example, I could maybe add like a really intense distortion or something, maybe an overdrive, and set that to 100% dry wet, maybe some EQ or something here as well to remove some certain frequencies, whatever, and then we'll add like a phaser or something like that as well. And so now we have audio track 1 here receiving the signal post this delay but pre the reverb, and then processing it all through all of this, and then outputting its signal to the master, combining with the output from the ARP sound. Now, in order to just save our ears here, I'm going to turn down both of these tracks quite substantially. And now if I unmute the ARP track and take a listen, So it's effectively like we've created kind of like a return track for this ARP here, but we've tapped into it from in between the delay and the reverb here. Now you might be able to see where we can also take this a little step further. So currently we're getting this signal from in between this delay and the reverb, but this is the combination of the dry signal and the delay signal because obviously our delay here has a dry wet knob instead of like a wet dry balance, right? Well, what I can do is kind of do an audio effect rack trick technique where I can group this delay to an audio effect rack, and then I can open up this rack, and again, for sake of ease, I'm going to call this delay, and I'm going to call this chain wet here, and I'm also going to right click, create a new chain, and I'm going to call this one dry. And then I'm going to go to my wet track here, or wet chain, and set the wet all the way to 100% wet. And now we effectively have independent control over the wet signal and the dry signal, right? Now I can go back to my audio track 1 here, and instead of receiving the input pre the reverb, I can actually go and receive it post the effects, but just on the wet chain of the delay. Now you might be thinking, well, this seems a bit weird. Why not just put that processing in here after the delay? Well, because then what would be happening is all of that processing would then be running through the effects further on that track, such as the reverb, right? Now, currently this example is a bit weird because obviously I could just put the reverb somewhere else, like on a return track or something. But if I had processing after the reverb, now this would start to make a bit more sense. But let's do this. So I can go to my second drop-down menu here and set this to post effects on the wet chain of the delay. And now all of this processing, the overdrive, the EQ, and the phaser flanger, is just being applied to the delay sound that I've put on here. And then we also have the fully delayed sound, full wet, full dry, going into the reverb on this same track. And then we can mix them both together using our track faders going into our master channel right here. So this is what this sounds like. Let's turn down the dry wet of the reverb here and maybe reduce the wet level of the delay going into the reverb. Have a listen again. And so if I solo audio track 1 and turn off this processing, you can hear that it's just the delayed version coming through here. Now also, what I can do is if I wanted to process this delay separately on another track, again, that would be kind of weird, but I could also just mute this wet chain here, and then the delay signal just goes straight into audio track 2, and I kind of have a separate delay signal and then the reverb after it. Again, I don't know why you do this, but it's an option. And if I solo the ARP track, we have none of that delay there. All that delay is going into audio 1. Again, I mentioned at the start of the video, I'm not kind of looking at practical techniques here. I'm just kind of showcasing these techniques to you because I think they're kind of cool. Whether or not they have a huge amount of uses, I don't know, but I thought they were really cool. So let's continue on this idea here. I'm going to unmute this delay chain here and re-engage the overdrive and the EQ8 and the phaser flanger, etc. And then I'm going to go back to the ARP track here and I'm going to add some further processing going on. And in fact, what I'm also going to do, I'm going to create a new chain on my reverb here. I'm going to call this chain dry as well and go to my reverb and make that 100% wet. So now we kind of get effectively the same thing where I can control the level of the reverb relative to the level of the dry signal using these controls right here. And now I can start to do some also interesting, weird processing, right? I could maybe start to go like, all right, let's add a grain delay, maybe also add like a phaser and start to create some weird stuff on this signal here. If I just do some interesting extra movement and processing here, turn this phaser down. Maybe if I also wanted to add like an erosion or something after this phaser. I'm just kind of getting a little bit crazy here. And I don't know, let's also add like a pedal for the sake of it to add some interesting kind of drive to this signal here. I have no idea what this is going to sound like. We'll find out together. I might just put the pedal before everything and maybe the erosion just after the grain delay, just so we don't kind of get a crazy sound going on. If I solo the ARP sound, So now we're in with an interesting problem, right? I have these three effects here affecting the signal post the reverb, which has also got this kind of parallel chain on it, which is the dry signal. And these effects are affecting the combination of all of these signals. And in fact, if I added something like a compressor, which is a non-linear effect, now if I turn down the threshold, etc., if I made any changes to the levels of the reverb or anything like that, it would affect how this compressor is working. But what if I wanted to reintroduce the dry signal after all of these effects? Well, yes, I could do that by selecting all of these right here, right-clicking, grouping them, and then creating a new chain here underneath this. But this gets a little bit weird and convoluted, right? I have now chains within chains and it gets very confusing. So instead what I can do is actually add a compressor. And I'm going to put this compressor after the phaser flanger here. And then I'm going to right-click on this compressor, group it, and again, create a new chain here. And I'm going to call this dry re-intro. I'm going to go to this compressor chain here, the chain that I have the compressor on. I'm going to call this dry, and I'm going to call the second chain affected. Now I'm going to go to the dry chain, open up the sidechain panel of the compressor, and go to my sidechain input here. And then I'm going to select the audio from, and I'm going to grab the audio from the same track that the compressor is on, which is this ARP track, and I can grab it pre-effects. Now, this is a bit weird. I'm not trying to sidechain this. Instead, what I'm going to do is actually just engage the listen button. And now this compressor is listening to the signal pre all of these effects. And then we also have a chain that is passing through all those affected versions here. So now if we solo this ARP sound and I solo this dry track, it's just the dry signal. If I solo this affected track, it's this affected signal. And now I can reintroduce the dry signal with just this control right here. I'm not applying any compression with this compressor. I'm using it purely to monitor the signal before all of these effects. And this is really the crux of this. And also you can do some really interesting things using this technique by rerouting audio in strange places. You can also create like internal feedback loops on tracks by using this compressor input monitor or sidechain input monitor feature. And it's wild. I have still only scratched the surface of the kinds of things you can do using this, but I can't believe that I'd never really thought about it before. And it offers up so many opportunities. I just can't really think of practical reasons to use this over something like just creating a chain, right? But anyway, despite that, I've gone ahead and created an example that utilizes all of these techniques to the extreme right here. I have a pad track, which is going into an EQ, a grain delay, and some bunch of other EQs and processors and stuff here. And then I also have this parallel reverb here, which is receiving the signal post one of the chains on the effect. And then I have another parallel chain, which is receiving the signal post the effects on another effects on this pad track. And then both of them are actually being rerouted back into this track at some point later on down the line here, as well as reintroducing the dry signal. We can see here this reverb is coming back in here at this particular point. The grains end up coming back in here at another point as well. And you can just kind of get some really crazy feedback or like processing chains and stuff going on here. And if I play this, this is what this sounds like. Now, is this practical? Not really, but I thought it was a really interesting showcase of these techniques. And you can get pretty crazy with it. Now, again, this is not a showcase of practical uses of these techniques. I just wanted to share them with you because I thought that they were really cool and kind of overlooked. And they create this really modular environment inside of Ableton Live, which I think is something that, you know, people might miss, or you might be able to come up with some really creative uses for these different techniques. And I really hope you do, because I can't wait to hear what you come up with. Okay, so there you have it. There are some advanced audio routing techniques inside of Ableton Live. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something useful and cool. And of course, if you use any of these techniques to come up with something cool, or if you find out some interesting practical uses of these techniques that I kind of neglected to look at in the video, then please feel free to drop them down below. Let me know, let others know, and let's share the knowledge around. But that's it for this video. If you liked it, feel free to check out another one of my recent videos here. Otherwise, drop a like and a comment down below. Subscribe if you're new. Feel free to buy me a coffee if you like to support the channel and further what I do. Otherwise, have a fantastic day, and I'll see you all in the next video.